Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon in this very shady and grey afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody at the inaugural lecture of Professor Alain Peyraube. I hope that I said it well. Let me warmly greet Professor Peyraube. He is Emeritus Director of Research at the CNRS of Paris and France, and he also a Chair Professor of Chinese Linguistics at the EHESS, also in Paris. And Professor Peyraube was elected honorary member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences on the 3rd of May in 2022. The section of Linguistics and Literary Scholarship is very much honored and thankful to Professor Peyraube for coming to Budapest and delivering his inaugural lecture, as it is not compulsory for honorary members to give an inaugural lecture. It is my duty to inform you all that the event will be recorded so that it could be listened to on the homepage of the Academy of Sciences. And now I am asking Professor Csaba Play, the full member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, to give his laudation. Please, Professor.
Jó napot kívánok mindenkinek. Good afternoon, everybody. I will have the few sentences in French, but do not worry. After the laudation is going to be in English. Je m'appelle Csaba Play. Je suis membre de la section de philosophie et sciences historiques de l'Académie hongroise et je suis très honoré et très ému à avoir l'occasion pour faire la laudation du professeur Peyraube. Alors, je vais continuer en anglais pour l'audience à comprendre. Alain Peyraube, who was born in Bordeaux in 1944, is a French linguist extending the cognitive and functionalist visions of language to the study of contemporary Chinese language and its history. He is a central international figure in the cross-linguistic analysis of recent varieties of Chinese and the factors of syntactic change. During his career, he has pursued investigations into various areas of Chinese linguistics, including the history of the Chinese language, its typological properties, processes of grammaticalization, the diachronic change in its syntactic structures, as well as the history of Western studies of the languages of China. His classical studies on the wide-scope historical changes in dative construction, entitled Syntaxe diachronique du chinois, évolution des constructions datives du XIVe siècle avant Jésus-Christ au XVIIIe siècle, published in 1988, brought him international fame. He has explored and mapped out the development and history of the double object constructions, the serial verb constructions, the passive constructions, coordinative structures, various locative constructions, and the localizers and prepositions involved in the latter ones. In these works, he systematically traced down and analyzed examples of these structures occurring in texts from the archaic Chinese period through medieval texts. Relying on these analyses, as well as related work by others, he set up a model of diachronic changes and structural innovation for the history of the Chinese language that is in accordance of what we know about language change in general, and with some specific properties of diachronic changes uncovered by his previous studies. His overview of the state-of-the-art of Chinese diachronic syntax in the survey volume New Horizons in Chinese Linguistics, published in 1996, where he summarized the major results in this field in the preceding 2 decades, including his own work. This study is one of his most cited papers even today. His new synthesis, with Theo Wibusch as co-author, Grammaticalization and Lexicalization in Chinese, published by De Gruyter in 2021, positions Chinese grammatical changes into the general theoretical framework of grammaticalization at large. Apart from his scholarship, he has made great organizational contributions to international sinology as well, serving as president of the International Association of Chinese Linguistics in 1998-99 and president of the European Association of Chinese Studies between 2002 and 2004. His role was instrumental in establishing close ties between China scholars in the West and the East, and in helping European scholars to join the mainstream of sinological research. Professor Peyraube has filled leading positions in the humanities branches of CNRS and École Pratique, and between 2010 and 2016, he was the founding director of Collegium de Lyon Institute for Advanced Studies. In this later position, he facilitated the organization of conferences inspired by Hungarian fellows, for example, on network theory and information theory and morphology. Recently, he has been appointed the founding director of the Paris-based EURIX, European Institute for Chinese Studies. Alain Peyraube has established close ties with Hungarian linguists and cognitive researchers in the process of his integrative cross-disciplinary and cross-national organizational work of humanities disciplines. As section leader of European Science Foundation, of the European Research Council and Academia Europaea, collaborating with Ferenc Kiefer, István Kenesei, Ilona Kovács and Csaba Play, he has supported the integration of Hungarian researchers into the European community in publication recording, organizing conferences in Hungary, for example, one by the European Science Foundation entitled Naturalistic Approaches to Culture in 2011, as well as in the evaluation both of the ERC and in membership drives of Academia Europaea. A decade ago, he mobilized his contacts to further on the initiative of the Research Institute for Linguistics of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences to establish the still flourishing cooperation with the Linguistic Institute of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Several distinctions indicate the excellence of Alain Peyraube. Since 2008, he has been a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur, and from 2019, he has become its officer. He is honorary member of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and of Academia Sinica of Taiwan. On the basis of his scientific merits and his intense collaboration with Hungarian colleagues, the 195th Assembly of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences in 2022 elected Professor Peyraube to become an honorary member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences on the initiative of Katalin Ékis, István Kenesei, and Csaba Flé. I can only add a personal note that I'm very glad for the election of Alain and for his presence in Hungary. He has been, besides all his scientific merit, a very close friend of mine as well. Congratulations.
Professor Place, thank you very much for your laudation. And now I may ask Professor Peyraube to deliver his inaugural lecture. Here, the floor and the microphone and all the equipment is yours.
Thank you very much, Csaba. Dear Mr. President, dear Mr. Vice Rector, dear friends, and that's okay, dear friends and colleagues, and dear István, Uba, Katalin, and well, thank you very much for inviting me today to give this lecture on the typology of East and Southeast Asian languages, and of course more particularly of Sino-Tibetan and Semitic languages. Well, the outline of my lecture today will be like that. First of all, I will very briefly, because you probably know as well as I know, or even better than me, the classification of the languages of the world. It will be a rapid overview, and then I will move to the Sino-Tibetan and Semitic languages and talk about the macro families and macro families of ST and Semitic. And lastly, there will be a brief conclusion. Well, as you probably all know, the linguists traditionally group the 6,000 to 6,500 languages of the world, almost half of which are going to disappear in the course of the century, into some 500 families. While some of these families are very big, like the Austronesian family, having more than 1,200 languages. Others are very small, having only one language in their own family. They are called linguistic isolates, like Basque in southwestern France and Spain, Burushaski in the northeastern Pakistan. Yeah. Europe, as you probably know, is quite poor in the languages. So the Atlas Linguarum Europaea officially recognizes only 90 languages and group into 17 branches, forming 6 families, of which, of course, the most important is Indo-European family. And there are 12 branches of the Indo-European family of languages, according to Contini in 2000. So the most widely spoken languages in the world, you are not going to learn anything. The first one, of course, is Chinese, with 900 million native speakers. Then Spanish comes in 2. Then English. Then Hindi Urdu, with million of speakers. Hindi Urdu has 329. Arabic, then comes Arabic, Portuguese, Bengali, French, and less than 200 million. We have Russian, Punjabi, Japanese, and Hausa. Indo-European, well, 10 of 12 branches. It depends if you consider that the Baltic languages and Slavic languages belong to the same big family, and if Indic and Iranian are grouped together into Indo-Iranian families. So you have Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, Baltic, Romance languages, and then Greek, only in Greece, Armenian, only in Armenia, Albanian, only in Albania, and Indic, Iranian, and Tocharian, and Anatolian. Okay, the 11 Romance or Latin languages are French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, spoken in France, Spain, Italian, Portugal, and Romania, and then Occitan in France, Catalan in Spain, Galician in Spain, Rheto-Romance in Switzerland, Corsican in France, and Sardinian in Italy. As you probably know, I did not say anything about Hungarian, which remain the only major languages, the major language in Central and Western Europe that does not belong to Indo-European languages. So it is, you know better than me, an agglutinative language. It has affixes, prefixes, suffixes, or even infixes, and it is characterized by its vowel harmony. Okay, so until now, linguists have tended to try to reconstruct proto-languages for the language families in which they specialize. Few have attempted in the past to compare different language families, and this methodological bias has changed considerably since the 1990s. Of course, you probably all know that hypotheses of large grouping were regularly put forward during the 20th century, but these groupings were never taken seriously, such as the famous hypothesis of Trombetti. Trombetti in 1905 thought that all languages of the world should belong to a single family. Also, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a Danish linguist, Pedersen, suggested that linking Indo-European and other families such as Uralic, so Finno-Ugric, and Samoan languages, grouping together with Altaic languages, Eskimo-Aleut and Semitic, and he called this macrofamily Nostratic. However, it was not until the early 1960s that this Nostratic proposal was taken seriously into consideration and developed by the Russian linguistic school Dolgorovsky and Ilyich Swyatych, which are included, and they added Kartvelian, Dravidian, and Chukchi Kamchatkian into the Nostratic hypothesis. But this Nostratic hypothesis has never gained acceptance in the international scientific community. The same was true at the beginning of the 20th century of an original hypothesis made by Schmidt, which wanted to include Austronesian and the Monk-Khmer linguistic or Austroasiatic languages into a family called Austric. The existence of this Austric family is still controversial, as in Benedict in 1942 proposed to group Thai-Kadai and Austronesian in an Austro-Thai family. This was some big groupings at the beginning of the 20th century. And but they were never, these big groupings were never taken seriously into consideration by the international scientific community of linguists. But change occurred in the early 1980s, especially the most famous typological linguist, Greenberg, as early as 1963. He proposed first to reduce the diversity of African languages into 4 macrofamilies, and this has been accepted by a large majority of specialists after having been the subject of some criticism by Africanists, of course. And this was also at the same time the period where the Russian linguist Starostin presented evidence in favor of similarities between the Proto-Caucasian, Proto-Sino-Tibetan, and Proto-Yeniseian, all of them putting in the single macrofamily. And in the second phase, the Caucasian family was linked to the Nadene family. The Nadene was a concept discovered by Sapir, but to which no one had previously paid much attention. And then all these families were linked, and Ruland in 1994 called this macrofamily the Dene Caucasian macrofamily. At the end of the 1980s, the American linguist Bankston was also convinced that the 2 isolates, Basque and Burushaski, as well as Sumerian, could be related to the Dene Caucasian. So he added to the Dene Caucasian macrofamily of Ruland in 1994, Basque, Burushaski, Sumerian, to form this Dene Caucasian macrofamily. And finally, in 1987, Greenberg himself reduced the 200 or so independent families of the Americas, including 60 languages for the languages of North America, to just 3 families, Amerind, Athabascan, and Eskimo Aleut, the last 2 of which, moreover, are supposed to belong to larger groups. So later, like the Russian linguist who supported the Nostratic approach, Greenberg was also thinking that Indo-European was clearly related to other Eurasian families such as Uralic, Altaic, and Eskimo Aleut, and he was speaking of a macrofamily called Eurasiatic. On the basis of this various proposal, in 1992, Rowland identified a dozen macrofamilies that will encompass to the 6,500 languages of the world, and the 12 macrofamilies are grouped into major geographic areas, 4 of them in Africa, Koshan, spoken in Tanzania and South Africa. This is the language of his clips. Nigeria Kordofanian, which occupies a vast area of sub-Saharan, is made of the 2 main branches, Kordofanian and Niger-Congo, and there are hundreds and hundreds of Bantu languages in Niger-Congo subfamily. Zulu, Swahili, Mbunda. Nilo-Saharan, a group of languages spoken in northern, central, and east Africa, with the Nilotic. And Afro-Asiatic, the fourth one, which includes Semitic, Arabic and Hebrew, Chadic, Berber, all Egyptian, Omotic, and Cushitic languages. For the Southeast Asia and Oceania, 3, Austric, Indo-Pacific, and Australian. So Austric is the only macrofamily present in Southeast Asia, and it groups together Austroasiatic, which is composed of the Munda languages of northern India and the Monk-Mer languages of Vietnam and Cambodia, Miao Yao in southern China and Vietnam, Thai Kadai in Thailand and Laos, and Austronesian in Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, as far as Madagascar, New Zealand, and Haiti. And then the 3 macrofamilies are found on the Oceanian continent, Austronesian, which is a subfamily of Austric, as you can see in the slide, and Indo-Pacific in Papua New Guinea, which has more than 800 languages, and Australian over 200 languages. As for the Americas, the Greenberg proposal was only Amerind or Amerindian. In North and Central America, while Algonquin, Uto-Aztecan, Central Amerindian. In South America, Macro-Caribbean, Arawak, Macro-Tucano, etc. And of course, there are many other languages of the Americas are grouped into 2 other macrofamilies, Eskimo Aleut in Alaska, which is a subfamily of Eurasiatic, and Nadene, a subfamily of Dene-Caucasian, which includes languages of the Athabascan family and other languages of the southern coast of Alaska. If we move now to Eurasia, well, there are 4 macrofamilies: Dravidian in southern India, which is Cordvillian in Georgia, Eurasiatic, and Dene-Caucasian. Eurasiatic, so Indo-European, no. Anatolian Romance languages, Tocharian, etc., are in the Eurasiatic macrofamily, as well as Uralic, 25 Finno-Ugric languages, as well as Samoyed languages, Altaic languages, divided traditionally into 3 branches: Turkish, Mongolian, and Tungusic Manchu, and the Korean, Japanese Ainu group, then the Chukchi Saktian in northern eastern Siberia, and Eskimo Aleut in Greenlandic, all this belonging to the Eurasiatic. And the Dene-Caucasian includes Basque, Caucasian, so they are no longer isolates. Basque is no longer an isolate language. It is now included in the Dene-Caucasian, together with Caucasian, including Chechen, Burushaski, the other linguistic isolate, Yeniseian. Well, Yeniseian family has only one language left, which is a Ket, spoken in central Siberia, and probably while its language going, if it is not already disappear, it will disappear soon. There are only very, very few native speakers of Ket now. And then, as you can see, Sino-Tibetan now was proposed to belong to the Dene-Caucasian macro family, together with Na-Dene. Well, this classification is far from being the subject of even a vague consensus among linguists. The only largely accepted macrofamily is the Greenberg's 4 macrofamilies of African languages. But for the Eurasiatic, the Dene-Caucasian, or the Amerind macrofamilies, there are still many criticisms by Indo-Europeanists, but by Americanists, and especially the ones who believe that linguistic change is so rapid after 7,000 years that all traces of earlier relationships have been erased by incessant phonetic and semantic erosion. But despite the controversy and lack of certainty, however, the concept of the unifiers, the American school of Greenberg and Rulon, and the Russian school of Dolgolovsky and Starostin, is paradoxically gaining increasing support. And some have even suggested going a step further and grouping together the macro families into a macro family. So relationships have been suggested to be established between Amerindian and Eurasian. The idea that Austro-Caucasian, Dene, and even Indo-Pacific might be related is also not far-fetched either. And then, of course, as you can imagine very easily, this will lead to a very big hypothesis of a single proto-language. And of course, the step has been the step has been made especially for East Asia and Southeast Asia, because in East Asia and Southeast Asia, as you see, the vast geographical area, while the step was first moved forward by Rulon itself, said there is only one proto-language, and from this proto-language, everything derived from this proto-language. Like there is only one common ancestor. So the common ancestor of the languages was only one proto-language, and the common ancestor for the evolution of the hominids was the common ancestor coming to 10,000 BCE or even 15,000 BCE. If we go back now to the East Asia and Southeast Asia, this vast geographical area is considered traditionally to encompass 5 major language families: Sino-Tibetan, Austronesian, Austroasiatic, Tai-Kadai, and Miao-Yao. So Sino-Tibetan, with dated to around 4,500 BCE, and generally divided into 2 main branches, Tibeto-Burman and Sinitic languages. At the time when the archaeologists identified the formation of what is called in archaeology and anthropology early China by Chang and Wang in 1996. So the term Sino-Tibetan itself was coined and introduced by Brunowski in 1931 to replace at that time the Indo-Chinese hypothesis and big theory. Actually, general affinities between Chinese and Tibeto-Burman, and a common lexicon is clearly sure in both branches, comprising a large part of the basic vocabulary and showing regular phonological correspondences. But we must acknowledge that work in the field of Sino-Tibetan linguistic comparison is still at a stage that does not allow the Sino-Tibetan hypothesis to be entirely validated. So, up to now, we don't even know if there is indeed such a Sino-Tibetan family of languages. Look, Tibeto-Burman groups some 250 languages with 65 million of speakers, including Tibetan, Burmese, and then Lolo, Chimpo, and other languages. And the connections between Burmese and Tibetan dates back to the 18th century. However, we found a hand document around the 2nd century AD that contains a lexicon of 155 words in the language called Bailanka. This probably you don't know, which is clearly Tibeto-Burman. This vocabulary has been studied very deeply, and we found that there are 110 of these 155 words, which are really to be considered as ancient Burmese, and 40 of them out of the 155, which are clearly ancient Tibetan. So the link between Burmese and Tibetan could go back to the 2nd century AD. So these Tibeto-Burman languages are spoken in the Himalayas of Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bhutan, as well as, of course, the Tibetan down to Sichuan and Yunnan provinces in China, etc., etc. So within going into the details of the current discussions about and controversy about the Sino-Tibetan family, I would like just to mention that one of the most important scholars, George van Riem, comes from Netherlands, with one of the best scholars on Tibeto-Burman linguistics. He claims, and there is no reason to consider the Sinitic languages are not belonging to the Tibeto-Burman family, in which case, of course, the Sino-Tibetan family simply does not exist. Because he suggests that the Sinitic languages are a branch of Tibeto-Burman, and not only a branch, but a sub-branch. Look at the diagram below. So the Tibeto-Burman languages are divided into Western and Eastern. Within the eastern part, North and South, and within the northern part, between Northwest, that Bodic, and Northeast, and he puts all the Sinitic languages in the Northeast sub-branch of North, which is sub-branch of Eastern, which is sub-branch of Tibeto-Burman. So all the Sinitic languages are included into Tibeto-Burman languages. So this is only a hypothesis, and of course the Sino-Tibetanists are against putting all Sinitic languages within the Tibeto-Burman subfamily. So the Tibeto-Burman diversity of this group is considerable. There are tonal and atonal languages, monosyllabic and polysyllabic, isolating languages and inflected languages, verb final and verb medial languages, and so on. So there are also classifications of Tibeto-Burman languages, like Benedict in 1972. He divided the Tibeto-Burman languages into 7 groups, Tibetan, Kanauri, etc., etc. And more recently, in 2003, another specialist of Tibeto-Burman linguistics, Thurgood, American linguist, also divided the Tibeto-Burman languages into 7 distinct groups, Lolo-Burman, Bodo or Tibetan group, etc., etc. So that's now the situation today of the Tibeto-Burman links and the Sino-Tibetan. Let's move now to the Tai-Kadai. So Tai-Kadai comprises the Thai languages and the Kadai languages. Yeah. According to Furless, my colleague Furless in 1990, which has clarified the first division and study of Tai-Kadai that was made by Georges Audricourt in 1972. So they cover also a very big area in Southeast Asia, stretching from the provinces in China of Guizhou, Guangxi, Yunnan, northeastern Burma, the valley in Assam, India, and the family includes, of course, Thai with an H, which is the national language of Thailand, and whose oldest written documents date from the late 13th century, and also Lao, in Laos, Zhuang Bui, and the Kan-Sui languages of southern China. So at the beginning of the 19th century, the Thai languages were considered as part of a larger group that was labeled Indo-Chinese. So former linguists like Peyraube, for instance, and was speaking about Indo-Chinese family. So inside the Indo-Chinese family, they were putting all the Thai languages. And then at the end of the century, this was reduced to 2 branches, and one of which, into the Indo-Chinese family, the Sino-Thai was one of the branch of the Indo-Chinese family. The other branch was the Indo-Thai. So there was Sino-Thai and Indo-Thai. And it was not until the middle of the 20th century that the Thai languages ceased to be associated with Chinese. And it was, why at that time, at the beginning of the 19th century, people were thinking on an Indo-Chinese family? Because the absence of affixal morphology and the presence of tones that led to the association to Chinese. So the Kadai languages, such as Kalau, Lati, Lakwa, share several features with Austronesian languages, and that was the hypothesis of Benedict in 1975. The Austroasiatic family comprises only 130 languages. It is divided into 2 branches, the Munda languages of northern India and the Hmong-Khmer languages spoken in Vietnam and Cambodia. Actually, these 2 branches have relatively few typological features in common. The morphosyntactic types are not the same. Munda is SOV language. Hmong-Khmer are SVO or even sometimes VSO. And according to Gérard Diflot in 2005, Austroasiatic could date from 4,000 to 5,000 years BCE, with its origin in Southeast Asia, perhaps even in eastern China, but certainly not in China. Then Austronesian, thought to date back to around 5,000 years BCE, the oldest family that was identified, which includes more than, as I said before, 1,200 languages and about 20% of all the languages of the world. However, we don't have any written record of these languages before 670. And these languages cover an extremely wide area from Madagascar and Mayotte in the west of New Zealand, Melanesia, Polynesia, Micronesia, etc. And what is interesting is that these 1,200 languages of this Austronesian family, Robert Blust in 1997 already pointed out that this Austronesian family has 10 branches, and 9 of these 10 branches, covering only 26 languages, are found in Taiwan. And all the others, 1,100, are outside Taiwan. So that was for the reconstruction of Proto-Austronesian. Of course, the Formosan languages, all the languages and the 9 branches in Taiwan are very important because they are making only 2% of the population of the Austronesian speakers, but all these languages, Ayatal, Saizat, Bunun, Tsurvukai, Paiwan, are most important to reconstruct Proto-Austronesian. And the other 10 branches, the 10 branches known as Malayo-Polynesian is thought to comprise all the other languages from Madagascar to Eastern Polynesia. And my colleague Laurent Sagar in 2005 was thinking that there are only 6 branches and not 10, and all the branches are attested in Taiwan, and only one of these 6 branches is also present elsewhere. That's about the same, but the difference is between the number of branches, 10 or 6. What is sure that the most important branches of Austronesian are located for linguists, not for people, are located in Taiwan. That's why they are called the Formosan languages. Then the Miao Yao, well, Miao Yao not very much interesting. It's divided into Miao, like Hmong in Guizhou, Yunnan, and Indochina, and Yao, like Chao, Min, and Mian. And finally, of course, there is also a family of Altaic languages in China, but not belonging to Southeast Asia, because this is in the north. And, as you know, there are Turkish, Mongolian, and Tungusic Manchu. And in China, they are spoken in the north in Manchuria for the Tungusic Manchu branch. In Inner Mongolia, in the northwest, in the provinces of Gansu, Qinghai, and Xinjiang, and languages like Oirat, Santa, or Tongxiang in Gansu, Baonan in Gansu and Qinghai, Mongol in Qinghai, Eastern Uyghur and Yellow Uyghur for the Mongolian branch. Then Turkish languages are in Xinjiang, of course, the Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Saral, and Western Uyghur, and the Tungusic Manchu, of course, only one left languages, which is Siba in the former Manchuria. So the reason why I have singled out this geographical zone, East Asia and Southeast Asia, because it forms a large group of 2 continents, Asia and Oceania, is that various groupings into macrofamily have been proposed over the last century. Almost every combination has been tried. And some proposals are now obsolete, like the Sinotai family, but over the last 20 years, archaeological, genetic, and anthropological evidence has accumulated some kind of evidence for linking several East Asian and Southeast Asian language families. So 4 or 5 scenarios for several macrofamilies are currently under discussion in the international scientific community: Austro-Thai, Austric, Sino-Caucasian, Sino-Austronesian, and Sino-Tibetan Austronesian. Let's look at the detail. Austro-Thai was first an hypothesis forwarded by Schlegel in 1901. So that related to Thai languages and the Austronesian languages. But it was probably Benedict in 1942 who actually proposed the existence of an Austro-Thai macrofamily consisting of the two main branches, Thai-Kadai and Austronesian. And then Miao Yao was added later. This hypothesis is still defended today by a famous linguist, Ostapirat, and he has found regular correspondences between the common lexicon of Thai-Kadai and Austronesian. It has also been criticized, notably by Thurgood, who argues that the Austronesian vocabulary in Thai languages has been borrowed. The date which is given is 6,000 to 7,000 BCE. Austric, another hypothesis put forward long ago by Schmidt, as you remember, it has now been taken up by Blust and Wright, who show a number of similarities between the two families. And others have added Miao Yao and Thai-Kadai languages to this Austric family. Then Dini-Caucasian, as we have seen, so between Sino-Tibetan and North Caucasian and Yeniseian, and then Sino-Austronesian. In the the hypothesis was taken by Laurent Sagar to link Sinitic languages and Austronesian, and then the Tibeto-Burman was left out, but then he changed his mind, and he has now an hypothesis of STAN, Sino-Tibetan Austronesian, grouping together all the Sino-Tibetan languages with Sinitic languages and Tibeto-Burman languages and Austronesian. And then the Thai-Kadai languages are also finally included in this macro family, which is thought to date from around 6,500 BCE, at the same time as the domestication of cereals in the Yellow River Valley. And of course, Stan Starosta in 2005 took a step further by calling the macro family Proto-East Asian. So Proto-East Asian is grouping all the macro families that has been hypothesized. And it is thought to have been spoken in central China, around between the Han River and the Yellow River, and between 10,000 and 8,000 BCE. So the Proto-East Asian comprises only two branches, the Sino-Tibetan Austronesian, so the hypothesis of Laurent Sagar, including the Thai-Kadai, and the Austro-Asiatic, and there is therefore no need to recognize any longer any Austric macro family. So this hypothesis of a single macro family, Proto-East Asian, remains for now a speculation, but it is still being discussed in the context of typological studies or even area linguistics, which tend to use syntactic criteria rather than phonetic or lexical criteria. And a number of syntactic properties have been identified by Jim Matisoff, Enfield, and Chappell, and myself in 2006. Because now if we move to the Sinitic languages, as you know, we have 10 Sinitic languages, the 7 major traditional dialect group, Wu, Ming, Ke, Jia, Yue, Xianggan, and Mandarin. And then in the late 1980s, we added the Jing, the Hui, and the Pinghua. And then the Mandarin, the Guanghua, is further subdivided into 7 or 8, depending on the outer dialect group. So the Guanghua is in turn divided into 8 small groups: Beijing Mandarin, spoken in the region of Beijing, Hebei, Inner Mongolia, and northwestern China; Northeastern Mandarin in the provinces of Liaoning, Jilin, and Heilongjiang; Mandarin Jilu in Hebei and Shandong provinces; then Jiaoliao Mandarin and spoken in the Liaodong Peninsula; the Central Plain Mandarin, Zhongyuan, in parts of Henan and Shanxi provinces; then Lanyin Mandarin in the province of Gansu and as well as in Xinjiang; the Jianghua Mandarin, and then the Southwest Mandarin. And out of these eight groups, the first 4, Beijing Mandarin, Northeastern Mandarin, and Mandarin Jilu and Jiaoliao, these 4 can be identified as Northern Mandarin, which is the basis of the official language of China, which is Putonghua or Standard Mandarin, whose official definition promulgated in 1955 is as follows. It has a standard pronunciation, is the Peking pronunciation, the basic dialect, the Northern dialect for the vocabulary, and the grammatical model, the exemplary literary works written in modern colloquial. So this is a classification of the 7 Sinitic languages. Well, you cannot see anything, right? Yeah. Okay. So it was only around 1850 that the common language of China really shifted from the Mandarin of Nanking to the Mandarin of Peking. And this has been well documented by missionary linguists like Atkins of Wade, who were in China at that time. And in 1909, the Manchu dynasty, the Qing dynasty, adopted definitely the Peking dialect as a national language for China. To come back to all this classification, we have to know that there are different systems of classification. While the genealogic approach, which leads to the construction of trees as the stem-bound model. But there are also, this is a traditional approach. There is another approach, which is aerial approach, which focuses on geographical contacts and leads to reasoning in terms of extension and overlap of areas. And then the typological approach, which looks for similarities between linguistic structures, while also highlighting the significant divergences. So the genealogical approach is still considered superior to the others, based on mainly on phonetic criteria. The so-called aerial classification has led to an important revision of certain reconstructions, because it is inside the approach of aerial classification of languages that the unity of the Uralo-Altaic grouping Uralic and Altaic languages was no longer recognized. And the same is true. It is thanks to the aerial classification of languages that we know today that there is no Kamito-Semitic family. And inside the typological approach, languages are classified into types on the basis of similarities in linguistic structure, usually syntactic and semantics. And this is a favored approach of a linguist, you probably know Joanna Nichols, Well, actually, she wrote a very interesting paper. She's the founder of the typological linguistics after Greenberg. So she's a typological linguist, and she wrote a paper some 10 years ago. What is typological linguistics, if anything? So she does not belong that typological linguistics could be an important branch of general linguistics. So while this is this typological approach that can make a distinction between languages with verbal nominal distinction and no verbal nominal distinction, with ergative construction or not, with languages marking the agent, having a DMO, differential, DOM, differential object markers, like Chinese, the back construction, etc., etc. So language with accusative construction, etc. And the old classification you all know between agglutinative languages made up of identity, radicals and affixes, inflectional languages with conjugated verbs and declinational nouns like Indo-European languages, and isolating languages, often monosyllabic and tonal, like Chinese. This was the classification, typology classification by type. And developed in the 19th century, this typological approach has evolved considerably. And it has shown that in many places, great genealogical diversity is often accompanied by common typological features in line with the results already obtained by the area classification method. Why do I speak about these different approaches of classification? Because you probably know that population genetics has come to lend a hand to linguists in their endeavor of classifying languages. And as soon as the geneticists began to systematically analyze the DNA in the 1970s, 1980s, they accumulated data, while the accumulation of data was considerable, at the same time as biochemical and molecular techniques have developed, as well as theoretical models of evolution necessary for the interpretation of genetic material in a historical context. And now you're going to even have ancient DNA, right? So the correlation between genetic distance, which is a central concept in population genetics, and linguistic distance was then attempted. And close correspondence were found everywhere between the genetic classification of populations and that of macrofamilies of languages as the ones that were proposed by Rulon and by Greenberg. So Greenberg and others in 1986 made to identify a lot of correspondence on American population. The French, he's living is in Swiss now, Escoffier, and others in 1987 were working on correspondences between languages and genes in sub-Saharan Africa. Sokal and others, and Barbugiani and others, and Estella Poloni and others were working on several African and European populations. And above all, the big, there was 12 Cavalis Forza, of course, Luigi Luca Cavalis Forza, and 10 other co-authors in 1988 have constructed a differential tree of 42 human populations from different continents, showing that there was correlation between languages and genes if you adopt the classification of languages proposed by Greenberg and Rulon. And later on, studies refuted the existence of indisputable correlation between the genetic classification of populations and the genealogical classification of languages. And even Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza himself acknowledges that the correlation between genetic distance and linguistic distance is extremely weak, if not zero. And I'm citing his paper in 1992, page 5623. And of course, we know more and more cases, especially in the Caucasus, where the correlation are really not good. The two very, very famous examples, as you probably know, are the first one concerned Armenians and Azeris. While they speak different languages, Armenian is an Indo-European language, and Azeri is a Turkish and Altaic languages. But they don't like it, but it is like that. They are close genetically. So the languages are very different, but the genetic distance is close. The second case is exactly the opposite, that the Chechens and the Ingush, they speak very similar languages. Chechen and Ingush is probably the same languages, while at least very, very similar languages belonging to the North Caucasus branch of languages, but they are very different genetically. And that was the paper by Nassidra in 2001. And what is specifically the situation in East Asia and Southeast Asia? Well, for a while, we all were thinking that the numerous population genetic studies in East Asia will favor one scenario over the other. All these hypotheses that I mentioned before. What is the best one supported by genetic experiments? Up to now, we don't know anything. We have to recognize that these studies have accumulated and diversified, moving from the analysis of they started by using classical markers, and then mitochondrial DNA, and then the Y chromosome. And now the situation is increasingly blurred, and it is not possible today to choose a macrofamily hypothesis with any certainty. Because the first major studies carried out by Chinese geneticists, but all these documents are coming from the Chinese journal, which is Acta Genetica. So the first paper by Zhu and Su in 1998 and 1999 was marking that there is a big difference between Northern Han people, Han is Chinese word, and Southern Han people. And effectively, from a linguistic point of view, it is nice to make a difference between Northern Chinese and Southern Chinese. All these dialects like Shanghainese, Cantonese, etc. are from the south. So at the beginning, there was a clear correspondences between genetic and linguistic. But other more recently and much more sophisticated genetic studies conclude that the differences in languages observed between Northern and Southern Chinese are simply due to cultural phenomenon without any genetic implication. Because so these differences between Northern Chinese and Southern Chinese are cultural and not implying any genetic consideration. And that was the paper of Ting and Yao in 2000 and 2002. So let's come now to the conclusion. As Colin Renfrew, the English scholar, as he pointed out in 2000, well, he was the father of the big synthesis, the debate on the existence or not of macrofamilies, not to mention the even more hypothetical existence of a single mother language, is not about to be resolved until we have shown that these macrophyla share several hundred primordial lexemes that will be no evidence to such a conclusion. But it is increasingly likely that the historical depths for reconstructing languages, families, or proto-languages is now no longer limited to 6000 BCE. Another conclusion that can be made is that the most recent and most promising, probably, research, whatever the contradictory hypothesis and lack of certainty to which it has so far led, is unique in that it has become really interdisciplinary. Linguistics have gone beyond their strict field of competence and have felt the need to work with geneticists, archaeologists, paleoanthropologists, and paleodemographers is an attempt to achieve the new synthesis that Colin Renfrew has been calling for since the early 1990s. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, Professor Peyraube, thank you very much for your very informative lecture. I think we have all learned a lot about it, and if we have not learned, we are at least interested in some parts and we'd like to involve it more. And let me be the first who congratulate you for being the honorary member of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences.
Thank you.
And let me give you, is it going up? Oh, if that's so easy. Ah, yes. Here you are, the diploma for you, Professor Peyraube.
Thank you very much.